This is the story. It began on a rainy evening. A girl with beautiful long blue hair was sitting in her estate opposite the doctor. She had been experiencing some strange symptoms for the last few days, so she called Dr. Fernando to tell her what was going on. This main character's name was Caitlin Grint, and the doctor said that all of her symptoms were perfectly consistent with pregnancy. The girl was only 22 years old at the time, and she faced the biggest crisis in her life, which she did not even suspect would come so quickly. She told the doctor that it was some kind of mistake, because she couldn't have gotten pregnant after just one instance of physical contact. But the doctor explained everything to her clearly and also pointed out all the strange symptoms that clearly showed everything. After that, he added that first it was necessary to tell this news to the Count. Caitlin, of course, was against it. She didn't want to do that, so she asked Fernando to keep it a secret until she figured out one thing for herself. After all, if it turns out that their dear youngest daughter is pregnant out of wedlock, she will definitely be beaten to death and kicked out of the family, and she could not allow that. Caitlin's hand was shaking so much with fear that the doctor, of course, did not object. He tried to calm her down and said that she absolutely had to get married, because otherwise the consequences would be very serious. In fact, her fiancé was Anster Moore. He finally proposed to her after a very long and unrequited love. Caitlin knew that they were supposed to get married under any circumstances, so she could think about this case. What a small problem that she could easily solve. However, the reason why her head was empty and she wanted to cry at any moment was because the child's father was not Mr. Moore. And when she told his doctor about this, the man was sincerely amazed. He didn't even know what to advise her in such a case. In fact, this amazing incident happened a month ago. She was writing a letter, as always, to her beloved Arson, and got carried away describing his appearance. Then suddenly, Caitlin heard some noise coming from the window. She went out to check what was there and saw a lot of people. Of course, she asked her maid what was going on there. The girl explained to the lady that someone came from the tavern and said that the young gentleman drank so much that he even fell asleep, so they were going to sort it out. As soon as Caitlin heard about this, she immediately remembered that there was a party going on with the knights, so she immediately rushed to the door and ran into the tavern herself. She was not supposed to return home soon, but Lord Moore would escort her back, so that soon she came to this place where all the knights had gathered. As soon as they saw her, they immediately began to greet her and told her to sit down with them. But Caitlin, of course, came for the Anser. Since he was one of the knights, the girl quietly entered this party. But the only thing she made a mistake in was that she drank too much alcohol. The man spent the entire evening begging her to go back home normally. However, the girl, under the influence of alcohol, kept asking him to show her at least some attention. And then she was finally able to be honest with him. The girl said that sometimes she wondered if he even liked her, and so she just wanted to make sure. She needed to know that this love was truly true. But in the end, Ansar finally confessed to something that had been bothering him for some time. Namely, he told the girl that he actually loved another. Of course, this shocked her. She could not understand how this was possible, but he was absolutely serious. Caitlin didn't understand why he proposed to her then. He started telling her about some kind of obligations and everything like that. But she didn't want to listen to all of this. Caitlin simply couldn't even hold back her tears and said that deep down she thought that maybe he liked her, even if not as much as he was, and she thought that this wedding was proof of this. The man took her by the hand and told her to leave already, but the girl didn't even want to see him now, so she just left him standing there alone and went into another story. In the end, Ansar did not stop her on that cold winter night. He left her alone and drunk. And now, looking back, the girl realized that he never loved her at all. She should have just gone home that night and not done anything stupid. But unfortunately, this did not happen. So now when she was riding in the same carriage with her brother, he began to suspect something and asked her too many questions. His name was Alexander. With a smile on his face, he asked if she was planning to meet her answer again that day. But the girl replied that this was not true. She decided to come to his training in order to support him. After all, everyone else always came, of course. Alexander loved his sister very much, so he was happy. Then Caitlin decided to carefully ask him about all the things she needed to know, and she directly asked her brother what kind of person Sir Hurt was. This guy was his commander. He said in a trembling voice that he was a good man, But of course I don't think so. He was just afraid of him. Caitlin asked what kind of romantic partner he was. Alexander began to scold her. He did not understand why she even started asking him about this, and also considered it wrong to say such a thing. But Caitlin had to find out more about this man because he was the father of her child. After some time, they finally arrived at the training ground. Alexander began to give her a short tour, and Caitlin kept looking for this Mr. Hurt with her eyes. The man soon approached them and called out to them, asking what Alexander was doing on the training field with the girl. Of course, he explained everything to him right away, because Tyrius was the supreme commander of the Imperial Knights, so he had to keep order when the guy and the girl met eyes. They looked at each other for a while without looking away. After this, Tyrius told Alexander to go and change into his uniform, and he himself would accompany the lady where she needed to go. The guy, although he didn't want this, still left, and when they were alone, the man immediately smiled happily and said that he hadn't seen Lady for a long time. Caitlin agreed with him. Although only a month had passed since then, the girl warned him about a serious conversation and suggested that they go somewhere so that she could tell him this news. But on that fateful evening, the girl was drunk and walking, leaning against the wall. And then she just happened to meet this man. He was standing leaning against the stone wall and saw her. And in the end, the person who stopped her from uselessly wandering down the street was not the Ansberg, but the period. He even offered her his coat so that she wouldn't freeze. But Caitlin decided not to waste time. She moved closer to the man, leaned against his pumped-up chest, and asked if he would like to sleep with her. That evening, when it actually happened, the man even asked her several times if she would regret it. He certainly couldn't regret it, so he did what he did with pleasure. Caitlin was truly pleased. However, she could never have imagined that everything could turn into such a big problem with the child because of that one time. When the men escorted Caitlin to the gazebo, soon after that, he himself came to her. He went into the estate to change clothes and held some small thing in his hands. She immediately asked what it was, but the man explained that he bought it because he thought it might suit her and was going to give it to her earlier. But the girl avoided meeting him, so he couldn't do it. Caitlin became curious about what was in there, so when she opened the box, she saw the latest winter collection of André, the most famous designer in the capital. It was a delightful brooch, which was also very expensive. She thanked him for this gift and said that it was simply amazing. And she herself suggested that perhaps he liked her, and in that case, things would go much easier. Trios asked her to get straight to the point, and Caitlin said that she was very interested in when he was going to marry her. Of course, she explained that at his age and status, he needed to think about marriage and had not yet spoken about the child. But the man explained that she shouldn't worry about it because he wasn't starting a relationship for marriage, and therefore wasn't putting pressure on other people. He also said that he had the same opinion as her. He was against Caitlin marrying. In fact, she didn't remember this. However, after they had done all their business, she clearly made it clear to him that she did not want to marry him under any circumstances. And now Caitlin really regretted saying such a stupid thing. However, to her surprise, the man asked her to start dating. He believed that she would not have found a cooler and more relaxed man, so he was simply the perfect candidate for her. Well, the girl at that moment was in real despair. She didn't know what to do. She simply said that she would think about his offer in that case. Caitlin's pregnancy was quite difficult. She could hardly eat anything and was constantly nauseous. The maid, of course, understood everything, so she was on the girl's side. She believed that she still needed to tell Mr. Hurt about all of this and bear this burden together, because it wasn't only the girl who had made this child. That evening, when she met him, she asked about the heir, as if by chance. And he then said that he was not even from an old noble family, so he did not see the point in having offspring. He didn't need a wedding or a child, so Caitlin couldn't tell him about her pregnancy after such words. It would have been too wrong and humiliating. She also understood what would happen to her in society if someone found out about this. And so one very sad evening for the girl, she asked her wife what would happen to her next if everything continued like this. The maid gave her a whole lecture about how to be careful during physical contact, and they almost even got into a fight. However, Mr. Moore came to see the girl, and the maid, who had promised Caitlin about this, asked what she needed to do. After all, he was already standing at the threshold. Girls! Of course she didn't like it. She considered herself a real crazy person. Since she decided to go out and talk to him, she should have just kicked him out from the start. However, she still let him in and listened to all these empty explanations and excuses about why he did this or that action. The man even had the nerve to pretend that he was so worried about her. But Caitlin stood her ground. She believed that it was no longer his business, so she was not going to enlighten anyone about her physical condition. The man even asked her for forgiveness. However, he was ready to swear that all those things that he told her that evening could definitely not become a problem for their marriage. The girl couldn't believe that she had fallen in love with such an idiot as him. He began to convince her that he only liked one girl there. But after the wedding, there were no problems. He definitely wouldn't have cheated on Caitlin with her. He swore that he would improve and even told her that he was not in a relationship with her because she was not at all interested in someone like him. It was just unrequited love that had no future. He asked both for another chance, Caitlin. Of course, it was very annoying that she was touched by his words. However, in this situation, she had to think not only about herself, so she thought it would be best to call off the wedding with a man like him, and Caitlin told him about it. For a person like him, this was a big blow, so he was not going to accept his loss so easily. He even grabbed her hand and began to beg. He told her how important their past was, and that for so long they had been hand in hand. Where was she now ready to leave all this? The girl was not going to listen to all this. He even said that he would try harder and kissed her on the lips. Of course, Caitlin was outraged. She pushed him away and scolded him for what he did. They argued for a while, but before he left, she said that she would pretend as if nothing had happened and asked that he not appear in front of her again. The man, of course, listened to her this time because he understood that it was serious. Meanwhile, Trius was at training and called Alexander to him in order to talk to him alone. Of course, the man was very surprised by this because usually the commander did nothing like this. He was not the kind of man anyone would want to marry or even get to know. This supreme commander of the Imperial Knights is a very stern and domineering man. He became a commander at a very young age, and there was a rumor among the knights that he was secretly in love with Alexander, so when the guy called him to talk privately, the man was, of course, very worried. Alexander also saw how deeply he was worried. During this conversation, he even thought that at that moment he was going to confess his feelings, and Alexander was so excited that he couldn't even think normally. Trios was a man who had never been seen with any woman. He approached Alexander separately, was embarrassed, and doubted. The guy simply had no other explanation. He didn't know what to answer. If he asked to date, he understood how risky it all was. And when the man was about to say something, Alexander interrupted him and said that his sister was feeling pretty bad that day and asked if he could leave training early to visit her. Hearing that Caitlin was ill, he of course also intended to go there, but warned that he would visit their estate after his training, since the other knights also needed to be released. Alexander did not understand why this was done, but Terios continued to behave very strangely. He said that he must personally thank the Count for allowing his precious son to stand as the defender of the Empire. Alexander continued to think that he was secretly in love with him and wanted to make some kind of proposal. So he was even more worried, but of course he couldn't stop him. Meanwhile, Caitlin was getting ready to visit a girl named Catherine at her estate, but the maid was not happy about it and even began to dissuade her from doing so. But Caitlin thought that since they hadn't seen each other, it was a good opportunity. So when she was completely ready, the girl went out into the hall to leave already. And while she was walking, she was talking to the maid and didn't even notice how Terios appeared in front of her and she ran straight into his chest. The man was very surprised because he didn't expect that she would run into him like that. And Caitlin even screamed loudly in surprise. She got angry at him because she said something about almost giving birth on the spot, and he rudely asked if she was pregnant. So Caitlin simply punched him in the chest. The guy was very shocked by this action. He didn't even know what to say, and the girl felt very awkward about it. She couldn't even look at him, but simply began to remove her hand. However, he took her hand gently and smiled. When the maid saw all this, she could not contain her emotion. She even thought that she was superfluous in this situation and wanted to leave. In the end, she left them alone instead of the two of them going outside for a walk. The girl thought that if someone saw them together like that often, they would definitely suspect something. But the man reassured her and said that no one would suspect anything, so she didn't need to worry about various trifles like that. Caitlin, meanwhile, assumed that the man probably wanted to continue this partnership. However, she did not know whether it was worth it to suffer so much after one night together and have such serious consequences. And besides, it was somehow strange for her to realize the fact that a man could become attached to her so quickly. It was a little suspicious. Caitlin asked if the gentleman had really come to check her out for no particular reason, and asked if she could take this as an intention to continue their exciting relationship without any pressure on each other. The man didn't quite understand why she decided to clarify this. However, he said that everything was correct, and Caitlin suggested that they date each other even more. She believed that this way it would be much easier for her to tell him sooner or later about the child. She also smiled and said that of course. He warned her that he was against marriage. However, if their so-called cool relationship continues, then perhaps he will want to marry her sooner or later. She also began to instill in him thoughts about a child, asking him to imagine his baby and how he would raise him, as well as various imaginary scenarios. But the man, embarrassed, said that she didn't have to worry about it, because he thought that she didn't want to allow it, although this was not true. The guy made it clear to her that he didn't need a wedding or children at all. It was enough to just be with her and that's all. Caitlin believed that he was hinting openly that he needed her body, and because of this, she felt a little uncomfortable. In the meantime, they came to the garden, and the man started talking about Mr. Moore. He warned the girl that such men are only good on the outside, so she should be very careful with him, especially if she really had some feelings for him. For the sake of her future child's well-being, Caitlin decided to tell the man all the details of why she fell in love with him. It was a touching story from childhood. During the Second World War, an incident occurred in Stern, when all the prisoners simply escaped at one moment. Then these people stole her little girl, who was dressed in an expensive dress, was a very good target for enrichment. So they of course did not miss the opportunity. Fortunately, several Imperial Knights came to capture these prisoners, and thus managed to save Caitlin. The man held her tightly in his arms and said that everything would be fine. Of course, since she was little, she was very scared and did not know what to do. She didn't even have time to carefully examine your knight's face. But she remembered one thing for sure. A huge sword passed through his right shoulder. He was badly injured during the battle when he held it. Terios already wanted to say that it was him, but he didn't have time, because the girl was absolutely sure that the person who saved her was Ansar, although this is not so. He asked the young lady if she was really sure of this, since she had not seen the face. Caitlin replied that it was definitely true. She couldn't know if he had a scar after that injury, because she had never seen him naked. So, of course, she couldn't say for sure. At that moment, Therese literally lit up with happiness, because she saw him naked first, and the girl immediately scolded him for talking about it so loudly. After all, someone could have sucked them. The man suddenly took her hands gently. Caitlin still indignantly asked why he touched her. And the man answered that he was doing it because he wanted just one look at her already excited him very much, so he could not do anything about it. Hearing this, Caitlin turned completely red. She couldn't believe that he was saying something like that, and because of this, she decided to simply not answer anything. After this conversation, that same evening, she often thought about that fateful meeting with the Answer. She often had this dream, and she was absolutely sure that it was exactly him. Then she promised him, in exchange for her salvation, as a sign of gratitude, that when she grows up, she will marry him in the future. Even though Caitlin couldn't remember exactly what this knight looked like, for some reason, she clearly remembered his facial expression at that moment. He smiled and said that in that case he would definitely wait for her. And Caitlin, of course, thought that it was Ansar. But now that everything had turned out differently, she felt very awkward and even ashamed. After this meeting with the head of the knights, she went to her friend. There, the girl burst into tears because for the first time she was finally able to completely trust someone. She truly felt safe next to her. Catherine Bennington, who just happened to come, Caitlin was the daughter of their senior maid, Lady Merrill. She was like family to her because they grew up together. And when Lady Marielle came to the Count's estate, she was already quite heavily pregnant. And the father, taking pity on the woman who would have to raise the child alone, quietly provided her with a place and a small house in the capital. So she was close to Caitlin since birth. She was a friend with whom they were friends for many years. Her luminary was the person to whom she could trust absolutely everything. And then suddenly, while they were discussing everything under the sun, the girl asked Kat if she had ever thought about meeting her father. Of course, the girl was shocked to hear this. She said that she did not miss them. However, she hated this man, and if she could, she would really want to take revenge on him. She saw all the time how hard it was for her mother, and her father knew about her and knew what she had to go through. He knew absolutely everything. But even so, he did nothing. So Catherine would never be able to forgive the man who I know deliberately abandoned them, and in her eyes there was real hatred for him. But soon the atmosphere between them improved, and she changed the topic of conversation to the one that interested her, namely, how her relationship with the answer was progressing. Kathleen was not at all happy about this, because she was already tired of even just hearing about this person. But once again, she had to tell about everything, and this irritated her. She didn't want to put all the blame on him, but in fact, it all started with him. So she told Catherine the latest news that she would not marry him. She said that it was all because Ansaro didn't like her, but Catherine reacted very energetically to this news. She grabbed the girl by the hand and said that she knew what Ansar was like. He was very modest and wanted to keep his distance, so it was obvious that he couldn't openly show his emotions, although she was sure that he loved her. Caitlin explained everything to her, for example, that he had another woman whom he liked, so she was not going to grieve anymore over this person who was not worthy of even a drop of her attention. As soon as the girl heard this, she was incredibly shocked, and she made a very scary face that spoke volumes. The girl said that he talked about her continuing to prepare for the wedding, but not putting pressure on him with relationships, and all because he liked another girl. At that moment, Caitlin even burst into tears. For her, these were two negative emotions, which she would like to avoid returning to, if possible, because it was very unpleasant for her. After that, she said that everything was completely fine, and she didn't care at all what kind of men were waiting ahead. The most important thing is that she got rid of the man who didn't love her. But Catherine still continued to insist that she return to Unser because she had loved him for so long and certainly could not believe that the girl had gotten rid of her feelings so quickly. She also reminded her of the day when he supposedly saved her, and Catherine also warned that she would scold this man, so Caitlin should not get too worked up, but just think about different things and make a final decision in which she would be confident. Even though Caitlin smiled and agreed, the girl was not going to do anything, because now she had a different life, and she summed up the relationship that lasted for many years, but did not bring any results. Even though Caitlin hadn't given birth yet, for some reason, she was absolutely sure that this baby would be incredibly similar to Terius. But the last few weeks have been very difficult for the girl because every time she ate something, it all ended up coming out. I was constantly in pain, and she just didn't even want to get out of bed. She even called the doctor to her several times. However, he did not say anything comforting to her, but only upset her with the news that she would have to suffer like this for several more months. Of course, Caitlin did not understand how she was supposed to survive this. She really felt very bad. The maid immediately thought that since she really felt so bad, she probably needed to cancel the meeting that was supposed to take place. It was in their estate that the meeting of the first Imperial Knights was to take place, as the young master was celebrating his promotion. This time, the Count decided to invite absolutely everyone to this truly big event. Well, Caitlin, even despite my terrible condition, I understood that she needed to come there. If she missed the home event, there would be too many questions that she would not be able to answer. The maid was incredibly happy because Mr. Hort was supposed to come. She had seen him for the first time recently, and she had been told that he looked like a terrible bandit. But this turned out to be completely untrue. The man looked very masculine and fresh. Amy immediately began preparing Caitlin for this event, because due to the fact that she was constantly feeling ill, it could take a little longer than expected. Before leaving, the doctor turned to the girl and asked when she was going to tell this important news to her father, because he believed that it needed to be done as soon as possible. He crossed paths with him in the reception room, and of course he asked about her health. He had to lie in order to cover for her, but he didn't like it at all. Caitlin wasn't going to rush into this. She believed that since she had time before the baby was born, she wanted to delay this shame a little longer. The maid insisted that she first tell Mr. Hurt, and not the Count, of course. The doctor was horrified that she still hadn't told the child's father about what was expected, and because of this, he even got a little angry with her. Caitlin calmed them down and said that she would definitely tell him, but she couldn't just come up to him and tell him directly to marry her and raise their child. She believed that first, like a fine rain soaking her clothes, she needed to gradually prove to Terius Hurt the importance of family and the need for children. And only after that could she dump this unexpected news on him. She was already under enough stress from the side effects of having a baby in her belly, so she didn't expect any more stress. The maid supported her as best she could, but Caitlin still had her own opinion on this matter and was going to stick to it under any circumstances. That same evening, Catherine was in her estate, and Ansar came to her. He was kneeling before her and truly idolized this particular woman. The girl, meanwhile, would tell him the latest news, namely that Kate came last evening and claimed that she did not want to marry him. The guy tried to calm her down. He assured her that he would fix everything and that she would want to marry him again. But of course, Catherine did not believe it. She extended her hands forward and told him to listen carefully because there was definitely no second chance. The man she can love is a man of the catering grind and not answer more. So he had to take this moment into account. After that, the woman kissed him straight on the lips, and he, of course, was ready to do anything. Meanwhile, the estate was preparing for another meeting of the Imperial Knights, or rather, a party in honor of Alex's brother's promotion, disguised as a meeting. This party was supposed to take place in the annex to their family estate. Caitlin still didn't understand why they decided to choose this place. However, it didn't matter. What confused her most was the fact that as soon as she arrived at this annex, she saw a chamber musical ensemble there. This was to be expected at a tea party for noble ladies, but certainly not at a meeting of seasoned knights, so the girl suspected something was wrong. Besides, Caitlin did not understand why there was such a crazy arrangement of the guests. She did not like the table at which she was sitting at all, and she was ready to give everything to move. Count Grind, who was the father of Alex and the girl, was the first to decide to say a toast. He spoke about how proud he was of his son and that he never doubted him. They talked for a while, and at some point, Caitlin felt like she was simply out of place in this company. She felt very awkward that she had to listen to all this. But despite this, she understood that Alex was definitely even more awkward than he already was. She just hoped that they would continue talking about him and not switch to her personality. But unfortunately, this did not happen, because her father did not decide to deprive her of attention, and she said that he wanted a daughter so much all the time that when she was born, of course he was the happiest man in the world. He started telling some rather shameful childhood stories to Keiki. The girl was very embarrassed, but Terius really liked it. In fact, Caitlin was absolutely similar to her mother. She had fair skin, large, sparkling eyes, and it was simply impossible to take your eyes off her. Terios did not refuse these words, he said, with a smile on his face, that she was really beautiful, and he had never met such a beautiful woman as Lady Grint in the capital, so she was truly unique in her kind. Caitlin blushed from these compliments. Of course she felt awkward and did not understand why the man was doing this. But her father suddenly started the conversation about the answer and their marriage. Of course, the girl understood that it was necessary to somehow save this situation, because it could not continue like this. She wanted to say something, but didn't have time because Tyrios intervened in the conversation and asked if Mr. Moore really claimed that Ansar and the girl were in a relationship because he wasn't sure. He looked at the girl with a smile and said that it seemed to him that she had already found someone else. And this news, of course, shocked both the father and the brother. Of course, Caitlin couldn't answer this. She couldn't say directly in front of her brother and father that these men were he, fortunately. Unser entered the conversation and told the commander that he was wrong. There was a clear misunderstanding between them, and the tension was palpable. She decided to join in their terrible argument. So with a smile on her face, she asked if he really was still talking about what happened when they were still children. After this, the girl decided to change the topic of conversation. She tried the salad, and she really liked the orange, although before she couldn't even see it. She always hated sour food and never touched oranges. However, her father noticed that something had really changed and was wonderfully surprised. Arius pushed his plate of fruit towards her, telling her to try it. After that, the man noticed the brooch the girl was wearing. It was the same one he had given her, and after everything that happened, it immediately became clear to Caitlin that everyone around her felt that there was something between them and she didn't really like it. But she decided not to worry about this reason. She couldn't influence it in any way anyway. Therefore, she simply politely thanked the man for the compliment and for sharing. She believed that it would be better this way, because sooner or later, her relatives would definitely suspect something and find out. So she could approach this issue simply smoothly and gradually. After this, they brought them a new dish. Because of this, the girls were left really bad, because there was fish there. She almost threw up at the table, and of course, she could hardly contain herself. In the end, she simply ran out of the hall so that this smell would no longer be present in her nose. And Trius wanted to go and check if everything was okay with her. But her father refused this, and only said that Ansor should go and check on her. Of course, the man felt very uncomfortable about this, so he simply left the table. Caitlin returned to her bed, and her ex-fiancé was sitting next to her and asking her to finally let him talk to her. After all, he needed it. But the girl refused. She didn't understand why he continued to insist on all this. She said that she simply didn't want to have anything to do with him anymore, just like he didn't want to, because he made this clear to her that evening. But then suddenly, Ansar asked why she continued to be so stubborn. He was already very tired of this and did not want it to continue like this. He tried to promise her that he was sorry, that he would become better, even took her hand and said that he would do everything for her. But Caitlin, of course, did not believe it. She didn't understand how she hadn't seen all this all these years. But now, when she looked into his eyes, she realized that he considered her a complete waste of space, so she politely refused him. She said that she was no longer a fool who would fall for these words, so she asked him to leave. She even got out of bed to do it herself. But Ansar plucked up his courage and was ready to take extreme measures. He grabbed her hand and pulled her towards him for a while and simply held her like that. The girl was amazed. She couldn't even take her away from him. Caitlin didn't understand why, in such a situation, the only thing that came to her mind was hurt when Terios came to their house. He also grabbed her by the wrist then, but this was a completely different touch. The man finally let her go, after she said that she was in pain and discomfort, but Caitlin had already drawn her conclusions. His hand was now a stranger to her. Ansar tried to understand how she could let go so easily of all these years, but Caitlin herself did not understand how it happened. After all, before, she was ready to sell her soul to be with him. But now she just wanted this man to leave as soon as possible. But she also didn't understand why he was so insistent on persuading her to do this, because he said that he liked another. She allowed him to go to this woman, so Caitlin didn't understand what the problem was. They continued their dialogue for some time, and then suddenly the man crossed all boundaries. He pulled the girl towards him and tried to kiss her, but fortunately she blocked her lips with her hand and did not let him do it. And if Terios hadn't knocked on their door at that moment, everything could have turned out even worse. Caitlin was about to let him in, but she didn't have time because the guy grabbed her by the lips and covered her mouth with his hand. She did not understand at all what was happening and how he could be like this. She became afraid to be near this man. She didn't know him at all now. He used to be kind and gentle, but now he was a completely different person. Meanwhile, the railing continued to knock on the room. Caitlin didn't answer, but she prayed that he would come. However, she heard how he suddenly left when Ansar finally let go of her mouth. Caitlin, of course, began to yell at him and call him names. And at that moment, the doors suddenly opened. When the Hort saw what was happening, he immediately took out his sword and pointed it at the Ansar, saying that according to the iron rule of the Imperial Knights, for any dishonor shown, the commander of the Knights has the right to carry out an immediate execution. He asked if there were any objections. Of course, Caitlin didn't like this idea. She tried to calm him down. She touched his hand and, shedding many tears, asked him to lower his sword. Of course, the girl had quite a strong influence on Trius, which is why he lowered his sword and told Ansar that the guy could not deny the fact that he violated the knight's honor. So he was going to start Depourier right there. In fact, for those who don't know, Depourier is a method of conducting a duel, which means opportunity in the ancient language of the Empire. This is a type of mild punishment that a commander applies to a subordinate if he violates the knightly codes. There was a rule that a knight who behaved dishonorably should be executed on the spot. However, there was a case when a commander could give a last chance to a subordinate. And this was just that case. In the presence of another knight or nobles as witnesses, they would engage in a fair duel, and the commander with more experience would allow the subordinate to win. This was a symbol of forgiveness for the subordinate who had violated the principle of the medicine. This was an old tradition. This had to happen immediately. So many guests, as well as the duelists themselves, went out into the street to do it. Caitlin's father was confused. He didn't understand what was happening, but the girl came up with something for him. She couldn't say everything directly, so she had to get out of this situation. Meanwhile, the girl turned to her brother. She was curious if there had ever been cases where the principle of not winning the commander had been violated, since she believed that such a case could happen now. Alexander said that this almost never happened in this duel. The commander's loss is a symbol of forgiveness. So if the guilty knight cannot win, it will be a real shame for the rest of his life. And that means you deserve to be executed. But due to external pressure, they can't cut off his head and have no intention of recognizing someone like this man who has violated his honor as a knight. Caitlin understood perfectly well that this was most likely exactly what would happen, and Alexander explained that knights who lose this duel consider their lives a disgrace, and so they simply part with it themselves. Of course, this girl was not at all happy. She understood how serious it was. But in the meantime, the fight had already begun. Both men were very angry and seriously determined to win. As a result, during the battle, the triumvirate knocked out the answer sword, and people approached him, of course, and began to whisper among themselves. They were incredibly surprised by this development of events. The guy, meanwhile, came up to him and whispered something in his ear, and after that he left. Caitlin was very afraid of what could happen to her ex-fiancé now, and didn't even know if he could endure this rush. The next day, Terrius learned that all the rumors about what happened spread very quickly, so now he became very popular among everyone. After they discussed all the important matters, the man asked who was the doctor of the Count Grint family. His assistant immediately answered who this person was, and also asked why he decided to ask about this. But of course, the man didn't say why he was interested in this. He only asked to contact this Fernando and invite him to the estate, and the assistant simply had to carry out this order. The next day, Caitlin told her brother and father how exactly this duel began. But of course, she did not tell all the details or what happened where Anchor was with the group and saved her. They were, of course, very shocked and were ready to simply kill this arson, and did not understand why the head of the knights did not do this. Caitlin immediately explained that this was all because she did not allow him to do it on her own. She was against it. When he heard this, he simply silently left the room and even slammed the door behind him. Caitlin realized that he was probably angry and was very upset about this. Her brother tried to support her. He told her to come up to him and just hug him. This should have helped her, and the girl really did so. She liked it. Because of her hormones during pregnancy, she became more sensitive than usual, so she just cried on her brother's shoulder for several minutes and could not do anything about it. Alex tried to calm her down. He said that their father was not angry. He was just disappointed. And right now, he was ready to break all of Answer's arms and legs for how he treated the girl. He also supported Caitlin in the fact that she refused the wedding, and explained that he would like her to meet a man who will protect her and love her like him and her father, and perhaps even more, for whom she will become number one in everything. Caitlin asked her brother to intervene in this situation and somehow help Unser with the results of the duel, because she would not want the man to end his life because of her. Of course, Alex didn't want to do this. However, he understood the girl's feelings, and in the end, she persuaded him. He promised her to talk to her father. However, he still couldn't promise that he would change his decision. After that, he left the girl alone and told her to have a good rest, because the last few days had been quite stressful. The very next day, Terios met with the doctor of Count Grint's family and was ready to ask him for all possible details in order to draw some conclusions for himself. The doctor immediately said that he had already told everyone that she was simply not feeling well, so he did not understand why they called her separately. The man asked the doctor to tell him what exactly was wrong. Fernando was very worried at that time. He did not know what to do and believed that Lady should have told this man a long time ago what was happening to her. Fernando said that he could not disclose the details of the patient's illness, unless, of course, Mr. Hort and Lady Grint were married. Only in that case could he tell everything that was necessary. But then he suddenly told the exact period of the girl's pregnancy, and the doctor even suggested that she had already managed to tell him everything, because he doubted that the guy could have guessed about it on his own. He also said that he had already heard about Mr. Hurt's ideology, but considering that the child already exists, Simply refusing to marry is a very unreasonable position in his opinion. As soon as the man heard about this, he immediately asked the doctor if he was really saying that the child already existed. Fernando was very scared because he realized that he had only assumed, and now he told him the truth. Although this should not have been done. In fact, he began to suspect that she was pregnant because his mother also often ate citrus products and refused her favorite ones when she was pregnant. And considering the fact that Caitlin loved pickled herring and, as he heard, didn't like sour herring, she suddenly changed her mind about these products. This simply couldn't have happened out of nowhere. So now when he heard confirmation from the doctor, he was very amazed. His cheeks turned red. He was ready to just jump for joy, but the doctor thought that this was not true at all. He slammed his hand on the table and asked why it was so hard for him to believe. After all, if a man sleeps with a woman, then of course there was a risk of pregnancy, but for some reason he hadn't thought about it at all, and now he was still surprised. Terios asked for forgiveness and said that it was really his fault that night. He was sober, so I was being careful. This thought did not even occur to him for some time. They argued with the doctor, and the man said a very good thing. He told Mr. Fernando that the girl was carrying his child. Of course, he would take this seriously. No man would pretend as if nothing had happened. Well, after such news, so he could not doubt his integrity. Fernando was very surprised to hear how he changed his mind. The guy even got up from his seat and started getting ready. He was going to go to Caitlin and talk to her immediately. He also thanked the doctor for taking care of the girl and promised him that he would contact him a little later when he had more time to discuss other details. Terios very quickly came to the girl's estate and began to remember all the time when she talked to him about marriage and children. At that moment, it seemed to him that she was just checking his reaction. Of course, he said it like a real idiot, although in fact, she didn't even think about it. He was just incredibly happy about their meeting, even if it was short-lived, or he should have noticed that something was wrong. But he simply dismissed this suspicion because he enjoyed the time spent with Caitlin. At the same time, the girl was in her room. She felt very bad again. She didn't know what to do and what to eat. Her child turned out to be very picky about food. How could she not understand? Why did all these problems fall on her alone? None of this would have happened if Anster had not fooled her for many years. She would not have despaired, gotten drunk, and done something so stupid. Caitlin simply decided to shift the blame onto this man. She even understood that if he committed suicide, she would have a terrible feeling of guilt because of this, and of course, she did not want this to happen. She will feel guilty all her life, so this certainly could not be a punishment for him, but rather for her. She thought that Terios would calmly carry out this duel and leave everything in the past. However, everything turned out differently. However, holding this duel in the personal residence of an aristocrat and not on a field was a real problem. Even then, people would certainly have been whispering about how a knight could act so dishonorably in such a place, and this would have ruined his reputation completely. And while Caitlin was talking to her stomach and blaming the baby for all her troubles, her brother came into the room, heard this news, and dropped the tray he brought for her to eat. Alexa immediately asked what she was talking about and what she meant. In the end, this news spread very quickly to her father. Caitlin was very upset that her brother betrayed their trust so quickly and immediately ran to tell his father about everything. The Count was already going to send some person to the Mur family so that they would follow the answer, and he would not do anything with his life because now he had a child. But Caitlin said that this man was not the father of the child, and this shocked her relatives even more. Her father immediately thought that it was Sirhurt because he saw their interaction at the banquet. But Caitlin immediately said that it was not him because she had not yet told the man about this wonderful news. So, her father could easily make a not very pleasant scene, and because of this, she would get into even more trouble. First, she needed to calm her father and brother down, then meet with Reese in person, sit him down, tell him about the child, and ask what he was going to do next in that case. They definitely had to talk about this, and then everything would work out. However, suddenly, a maid came into their room and told them the most terrible news for Caitlin, namely, that Terios had arrived at the estate. She didn't understand why this happened now after what had happened in the end. Father said that the man should be brought to this place and not to the living room. He believed that they should talk. Of course, Terios didn't plan to go to Count Green first. However, when the butler told him that Caitlin was with her father, he realized that he simply had no choice. So he sat opposite the Count, and the man asked in a rough voice what had brought him so suddenly, and without any warning to the estate. The guy understood that if he said that he came because he found out about the girl's pregnancy, he would definitely get very angry and ask why he didn't know anything before and didn't take any measures. In such a situation, if he says that he came to ask permission to date Caitlin, then he can understand the battle with Answer as a rivalry. By the expression on the girl's face, he knew that she already understood. So he decided to show that he was very serious. So he did something very rash. He got down on one knee in front of the Count and said that he had come to propose to his daughter, and this, in turn, greatly surprised the man. Caitlin didn't understand how this had even happened and what she should do now, but in the end, she realized that lying any longer was useless, so the two of them explained the whole situation to her father. They started arguing among themselves, and Thyroid said that he never considered the girl as a lover and did not treat her frivolously. She really meant a lot to him, and he could not deny it. Caitlin couldn't believe that he could lie so easily in front of strangers and not even worry about it. But then he suddenly did something very brave. He knelt before the Count and said that he was ready to do everything to make him feel better. He even allowed her to come up and hit him if it was necessary. The man was really going to do it, but luckily, Caitlin intervened in time. She asked what bad he had done. He said that he was ready to take responsibility, so she did not understand what all this showdown was about. Of course, the Count didn't like all this. He was upset by the situation that had developed. But soon after that, he left her alone with the man because the situation no longer concerned him. The man, of course, began to ask her a lot of questions. For example, why she kept it all a secret, or how long she was going to do this. But Caitlin decided not to explain anything to him. She prepared contracts for them and asked for forgiveness for not telling him earlier. But Caitlin was also finally able to breathe a sigh of relief, since she had been surrounded by so much stress all this time that she was happy that it was all over. Terios asked how she felt in general, and even asked for forgiveness for the fact that he was not there all this time, and he did not know what she had to go through alone. For Caitlin, these words meant nothing, because she did not believe in the purity of his intentions and feelings. So they simply decided that from that day on, they would call each other by their first names. Despite the fact that it was a small thing, because they were soon to be married, he took it quite seriously. Caitlin brought papers to make several points for their happy life together. She believed that this was very important and did not want to step on the same problems that were with Arson. Since they got into all this together, but considering that he didn't want children or a wedding, she's grateful that he had the courage to propose to her anyway. So, the first point she proposed was to respect each other's freedom in a love relationship within the framework of non-problematic relationships. She believed that this was the least that she could do for him. Terry was so angry about this rule that he tore up the paper and said that in his opinion, they did not need this happy family life, as she called it. Of course he did not like it. Caitlin didn't understand why he was angry with her, because she just wanted to do everything for the best, and he ultimately simply advised her not to do anything unnecessary, because that would definitely increase his stress. They argued for a while longer, and then the next day, Caitlin went into town to unwind a bit. She didn't like at all that such a noble knight like him argued with her for so long, so she decided to leave these problems for later and went to the city to visit her friend Catherine as well. And when she had already approached the house, she saw Ansar on the threshold. She did not understand what he was doing there at all, and was even a little scared. She suggested that perhaps, like all the other knights who chose death when they lost their honor, he did the same, and she believed that he came to Catherine in order to say goodbye to her. After all, the three of them were friends. She was even afraid to imagine what would happen to Catherine when she found out that he was going to die. This man saved her life, but now Caitlin considered herself the cause of his death, and because of this, she incredibly strongly reproached herself. She decided that she had to stop him. After all, if Ansar made a decision as a knight, then the only one who could stop him was she. The girl quickly ran and was about to shout out his name, but she didn't have time. And all because Catherine came out of the apartment. She looked very beautiful in a white dress. She looked at him with a small smile, and the guy was noticeably embarrassed when he saw her. And after that, something happened that Caitlin did not expect at all. She took him and kissed him straight on the lips. They stood like that for a while. The girl could not believe that it was not a hallucination. Immediately after this, she returned home and cried bitterly for some time because she felt humiliated and betrayed. The maid tried to console her. She, as always, took Caitlin's side and began to humiliate Answer because she didn't like him from the start. This man was very suspicious. Now Caitlin realized that this girl, according to Ansara, whom he likes, is Catherine. At first, she was certainly shocked by this news. But later, when she accepted this situation, she even became interested. After all, if they kissed Answer, then for what reason did Kat so desperately want to bring her back together with him? It all looked very strange and suspicious. She even believed that perhaps Count Moore did not consider Catherine as a suitable match for his son, and the girl should have known this, so they met secretly without loudly declaring themselves to anyone. She really preferred to see her man married, not to someone he barely knew, but to his close friend. She didn't understand what this girl was thinking about or what she was planning. Meanwhile, Caitlin came to hurt. She didn't even have time to wipe away her tears and get herself in order before he entered the room because the maid ran and let him in immediately. The man, of course, immediately noticed that she was crying and asked what had happened to her, but Caitlin only replied that she did not want to talk about it and lowered her head. She could not even look at him, but then suddenly he himself guessed that she probably met with Answer, just like that time. After all, this man always brought her to tears from which she could not get rid. The girl, so that he wouldn't immediately run to sort things out with him, said that everyone has things that they don't want to talk about, so she asked him not to pressure her. Terry, after listening to her, simply sat down next to her, which really surprised the girl. She didn't think that he would worry and be concerned about her, and would also want to stay close, which was nice. After a short silence, she asked why he came, and eventually she learned that he did it because he wanted to share dinner with her and invite her to his home. As he spoke these words, his palm touched her cheek and wiped away her tears. He looked at her with a slightly sad look and said that since they would soon have to live together, he would like to introduce her to the people from his estate. But he immediately abandoned this idea when he saw how depressed she was and simply said that he would return later when everything was better for her. Caitlin couldn't believe that after everything that had happened between them, he came and invited her to dinner. He swallowed his pride and tried to make amends, so she decided not to cling to the past and miss the present moment anymore, so she happily agreed to come to him. She even smiled and said that she really would like to come to Ritlin, and decided that it was time to finally move on, and that she needed to let go of this past that was causing her pain and suffering. Therefore, she changed her clothes rather quickly and arrived with him at the estate as soon as Caitlin came out, and was rather amazed by what she saw. His house was not as big as she imagined it, and they were immediately met by his assistant. His name was Glenn, and he said that it was an honor for him to meet her. Caitlin greeted him and said that she was also glad to meet him. Terry, meanwhile, talked with Glenn, and she noticed that he behaved more relaxed with the servants than she thought. In general, the man was a little different at home. After some time, a nice woman named Sonia, who had prepared dinner for them, led Caitlin into the dining room. She was a very nice woman. Everyone was incredibly polite, and as soon as Caitlin looked at these wonderful dishes, she realized that she didn't even feel nauseous, and nothing in this food repulsed her. On the contrary, she even wanted to try it all. And Sonia explained that she had been told in advance that the girl was going through a difficult period due to morning sickness and weakness, so she had tried hard on this dinner and was sure that these dishes would suit her. She came from the country of Gerbene, which was located far away on the northern continent. They ate mostly soft food, and it was for this reason that women in Gerben rarely suffered from morning weakness. After this, Sonia scolded her master for some little things, and Terry even got a little angry about it. But at the same time, they had no intention of bringing their relationship to fruition from the start. Caitlin did not expect to see him behave freely with the servants. This role suited him much better than the stern commander of the knights, in which she saw him all the time. Meanwhile, he had already tried all the dishes. Although he didn't really like them, he preferred solid food, and Caitlin, having taken her first sip of soup, was amazed. For her, he became simply amazing, and while Caitlin was eating, Sonia gave her many different compliments about her appearance, character, behavior, and everything else. She also believed that if the child takes after her, whether it be a boy or a girl, he will still be incredibly cute. But if he takes after the gentleman, then she would need to think about it more, because as a child, he was very cute. But time still spared no one. The man was very embarrassed by all this. Therefore, when the meal was over, the servants left them alone, and Sonia asked her to let them know if anything else was needed. Since Kathleen really liked the food, she asked for more and realized that somehow Sonia, with her warmth and soft tone, reminded her of her mother, even though she was not at all like her. If her mother were still alive, she would be about the same age now. She kept repeating that she married the man she loved more than anything in the world, and that's why she was happy. She always hoped that Caitlin would grow up and find happiness like her, and because of this, the girl was a little sad, because now that she had grown up and the wedding was just around the corner, she could not experience the love that everyone around her had. She forgot about marrying for love and was going to marry someone whom she did not even know 2 months ago. And even after the wedding, she could not hope for love because her future husband was very cold, unpredictable, and freedom-loving. Because of this, Caitlin became very sad. She considered all this unfair. She didn't know why everyone else, like anchors and cadres, enjoyed romantic relationships, but she would never get that. And besides, she didn't know why she had become so emotional lately and simply couldn't even control herself. And while all these thoughts were being born in her head, she couldn't stand it, slammed her hands on the table, and said that she wouldn't marry him. She got up from the table and didn't even intend to explain anything to him. Terry was, of course, amazed. He asked what she was talking about, but as soon as she started to leave, he got angry, slammed his hand on the table, and walked up to her, telling her to sit down right now. He took out a piece of paper from his pocket. It was a form for registering the Empire's marriage, and asked her to sign it. Of course, she didn't like the fact that he had already created this contract in advance, so she broke it. But fortunately, the man had several more prepared. He sighed heavily and asked who she was planning to marry then. If not him, Kathleen was, of course, stubborn and snapped at him in response because she didn't like his obscene attitude. Of course he didn't like it. He grabbed her by the waist, pulled her towards him, and asked if she was really saying that she was going to marry someone else with his child in her belly. Caitlin knew about the outdated code of chivalry, the belief that a man would take responsibility for a woman who was pregnant with his child. However, she didn't know if he could truly love his wife, because it was a completely different matter with someone like Irius Hurt. Normal romance, in her opinion, was impossible, so she pushed him away, said that she was leaving, and asked him not to come back. When he followed her and continued asking a lot of questions, Caitlin explained that she did not want to enter into a marriage without love. And after that, she simply ran out of the room. The next day, Caitlin went to meet with other noble ladies who quite often had tea parties. They were very glad to see her because the girl had not appeared for a long time, and she said that she had not had much time lately because she was busy with dates with this one. The ladies were very shocked when they heard about Kurta. They, of course, knew all the rumors that were circulating about him, so it was hard for them to believe that this was really true. She certainly had no plans to appear at a public event anytime soon. However, her dad had told her to lay the foundations early, and all because if someone, like her not particularly connected state friend, announces their wedding, then people will definitely start talking. Then one of the ladies, her name was Everloyd, but she was also called Rod with Wings, said that now this man was the most acceptable man in the capital. So she asked to tell all the details of their acquaintance. Petlin told everything as best she could. And after that, she noticed that another lady bunker was not present. And then the girl with red hair said that the latest rumors revealed that she was pregnant. The girl was shocked when she heard this. Yes, we immediately told all the details about these rumors. So Caitlin found out that she got pregnant, and her father simply ran away. She was also irritated by the fact that all these ladies thought it was very funny, although she was essentially in almost the same situation. One of them got angry and asked if they really thought it was bad to trust someone to change their life completely forever. She didn't understand how these girls were capable of saying something so terrible and showing no compassion at all for another lady. That's why Caitlin wanted to leave this place. She believed that in that case she also didn't need to be there. She warned the girls that she wouldn't appear for some time, because she simply didn't share their psychology of life. The girls tried to stop her, but it was all useless. Caitlin had already decided everything for herself and was not going to change this decision. She didn't know for sure why she reacted so strongly. Perhaps it was because she saw herself in her and simply couldn't contain herself. She, like no one else, understood that if Terius had not proposed to her, these girls would have directed their anger at her and not at Sylvia Bylang. Yes, she started to leave this room. Then she saw her fiancé downstairs. She didn't understand what he was doing there, and in the end, she still went down to him because he was waiting for her. When Caitlin asked how he knew she would be there, he explained that he went to her family estate and that they told him exactly where she was. Terry decided to move on to the conversation they had talked about last time, namely that she didn't want to get married without love. And he asked what exactly she meant. She said that exactly as it sounds, she meant that if she had to get married, she would like to have someone she truly loves by her side. She wanted to fall in love first and then cultivate love with subsequent marriage. Of course, this might sound childish. However, this was exactly her idea. Terry suddenly turned away from her because he was very embarrassed and asked if the kind of relationship she wanted to see couldn't be with him. She didn't expect to hear this, but the man explained that they were supposed to get married anyway, and if she needed love, he thought they could try. He explained that he wanted to try dating her all this time, and nothing had changed. They were just doing everything in the wrong order. However, he didn't see any harm if their feelings were truly real. Caitlin was so shocked that at first she couldn't even say anything. And after that, she asked several times if he really wanted to try dating her. He shouted and said that he was a knight and asked if she was really sure that he could make a scandal when he already had a wife. How would he expose himself then? He didn't need any conditions at all. Because of this, the man became very angry, and his whole face turned red. Caitlin was very shocked. She did not understand how he, hating marriage and children, spoke words of love that he had recently insisted that they would only be partners. All this sounded very confusing to her. She believed that he said this all because he knew how much she wanted to experience love at least once. This was certainly not the answer she expected. However, she believed that perhaps Terry was a better person than she assumed, so she decided to agree and give it a try. That same evening, returning to the estate, she told all this to her friend, the maid, who, of course, upon hearing about it, was immediately very happy. After that, the maid said that she needed to sort special letters. She had wasted a lot of time chatting, so she felt awkward asking Caitlin for help. These letters were not simple. After all, when the new year came, the trading company cooperating with her family sent letters of gratitude, and they, in turn, sent responses only to those with whom they continue to work. Previously, this was the task of Caitlin's mother. However, after her death, Madame Merrill took over this. The girl even offered to help herself. She had no idea how to do it. She was just bored and didn't want to be alone with her thoughts. So she made this decision. Then Caitlin began to read letters from the butcher shop and the antique interiors in turn. All these trading companies had their own characteristics, but the biggest attention was drawn to a store that did not have a company name. It simply had a person's name written on it. She didn't understand who was sending such a thank you letter for the new year, and because of this, she wanted to cancel this cooperation. She turned to the maid and asked her to tell her details about this company. In fact, it was a trading company with which they worked back when the woman, that is, Caitlin's mother, was alive. They still thought that they would cooperate, and because of this, they sent letters. When Kathleen's mother was alive, she had complete hope for a cure, and, thanks to her father's insistence, she tried everything that was good for her health. Madame Merrill bought rare and expensive herbs from everywhere, so Caitlin decided not to sign a contract with this person anymore, since they no longer needed this cooperation. That same evening, he was in his estate. He was in real despair and did not know what to do at all. He was still unable to win Caitlin back to him. He even understood that she shouldn't have confessed in the tavern that his feelings were not real. She always showed a lot of time for them, and he believed that a few pleasant words could bring everything back. But he was wrong and didn't understand how Caitlin could change so abruptly. Of course, he knew that there were reasons for this, but he didn't know what exactly. Although Ansar began to assume that it could be because of Terry, he was just a boss with whom he maintained a warm relationship, a man who had absolutely no connection with Caitlin. However, that day he said that he would cut off his hands if he touched the girl again. It wasn't just a warning not to harm women. It was directed specifically at Caitlin, so the man realized that the two had a special relationship. While Caitlin was helping with the letters, her father was walking down the street and suddenly saw Catherine, who decided to come and visit them. He was a little surprised to see her and asked if Maril was supposed to be returning that day, and also said that he would like to arrange a small dinner in honor of her return. Catherine, despite having a smile on her face, considered it all very funny and disgusting, and did not understand how he wanted to organize a joint dinner in honor of the return of a simple maid. Because of this, to others he would look very kind and majestic. However, when he does this, in reality, he is just trying to cover up for his vicious wife and daughter. So she had her own scores to settle with this man, who believed that if he was going to somehow show his concern, it would be better if he did nothing at all the way he did. Catherine was disgusted even to look at this man. The suffering she was experiencing, being next to Caitlin's respected daughter, was also unbearable, but she had to endure it. Her mother once admitted that she felt the same way when she saw the Count and Countess together. However, her mother overcame this sadness and humiliation in her own way. So now Catherine has decided to take up this matter herself. She was going to take revenge on the Count in her own way, and thought out a plan down to the last detail. Catherine came to Caitlin and greeted her with a joyful smile, but her friend did not respond in kind. I immediately realized that something was wrong between them. The girl looked and behaved completely differently. When Catherine called her, she was usually ready to run out barefoot to greet her friend. But now everything had changed, and because of this, the girl was very wary. She didn't like such abrupt and incomprehensible changes. The girl actually admitted that she came to tell him something about Answer, but Caitlin finally looked up from the mirror and said that before that, she had to tell her something too. She handed her an invitation letter and said that she was getting married. Catherine certainly didn't expect to hear this and was incredibly surprised. She didn't understand what the girl was talking about. Well, if she explained to us who she was marrying and said that I didn't want to rush into the wedding. But since he insisted, she decided not to refuse. Catherine was so angry that she even yelled at the girl. Of course, Caitlin did not understand why she behaved this way because it was very strange and suspicious. Catherine said how much it irritated her that not much time had passed since their last meeting, so she could at least share with her. But Caitlin explained that she did not see any problem with this because she shared now. The girl was so angry that she left the estate quite quickly. She even threw a plate at the wall when she returned home. Her mother tried to calm her down. She hugged her and said that everything would be fine. Catherine burst into tears and said that everything she had prepared had been destroyed, and she would not know what to do next. But then suddenly, the woman became so angry with her that she even hit her and asked if she hadn't told her about how she had suffered. She thought that Catherine knew how much pain she was in because she couldn't call him her husband, how she hated the woman who took her place, and that it was a pity to raise her daughter alone. And besides, the girl herself said that it was unfair to watch from afar without the opportunity to call this man her father. It was very unpleasant for her. Mother started telling her all these things, and after that, she grabbed her by the hair and asked why she couldn't be a normal daughter because she had already ruined her life and promised that she would fix it. But now it turns out that everything is going wrong. She burst into tears and promised her mother that she would definitely fix everything so she could rely on her. Meanwhile, various rumors about Terry, Caitlin, and Ansor began to spread openly throughout the capital, and all of them were quite plausible, although they spoke slightly different information that contradicted each other. When Alexander saw that he had come to training because of rumors of suicide, he was very shocked and even outraged to some extent. He believed that he should have simply laid low and not done all this. Not only did he come to the training field, but he also brought Catherine with him. Alexander didn't understand anything at all, but the girl happily applauded and followed his every action. The knights began to spread even more rumors. They believed that the boy and girl looked quite good together. However, they were still interested in other details and details of personal lives. Meanwhile, Terry had already approached them, holding a small box behind his back, and asked Alexander to give it to Caitlin when he returned home and be sure to say that it was from him. My brother immediately asked what it was, and Terry took out a small note and explained that it was a Mont Blanc Castel cake from a chocolate bonbon bakery on a certain street. Before this, Caitlin simply said that she wanted this cake. He realized that it would be too late if he came after training, so he wanted his brother to pass this on. Meanwhile, Catherine approached them. She smiled a little too happily at the commander when she met his gaze and said that she had been waiting for him, so she was glad that she had managed to catch him. She asked if it would be a bother for him to spend a little time with her for a conversation. Of course, he didn't understand why she wanted to do this, but the girl explained everything. She said that she had been Kate's best friend since childhood, and that she was very sad that they had not had the opportunity to meet. But she was glad that she was able to meet him at least here. Of course, as soon as Tetri heard that she was Caitlin's friend, he was immediately happy because he thought that this would be a great opportunity to learn even more about the girl. Catherine herself took the initiative and said that she would like to drink tea with him and talk a little. Since he was her other half, she thought that she should study what kind of person he was. The man did not give birth to you at this request, so he accompanied her to the garden, and Catherine immediately began to give him many compliments and gratitude for the fact that he allowed her. And she was also happy that Ansar was a knight and was able to take her here. She began to praise this man, and suddenly Catherine pretended as if she realized that it would be somehow wrong on her part, because he was, after all, Caitlin's ex-boyfriend and even fiancé. But she also said that the man could not worry at all. Caitlin definitely did not have any feelings for this man. After all, when she climbed into her invitation, she saw that the girl was completely in love with him. He listened to all this with a smile on his face, but he considered it all very suspicious, because the girl was screaming that she wanted to fall in love, could only count the days. She didn't even treat him as a lover, and therefore he thought that these words were somehow not very true. Then he decided to change the topic of conversation in order to get to know this girl a little better, and asked how she met Caitlin and became friends. She told the whole story from the very beginning, and of course she didn't forget to add Ansora everywhere, because it was her secret idea. But during the conversation, he only fell in love with Caitlin even more, because even according to her friend's stories, she was very polite and sweet and generally a good girl. But every time the topic turned to the male annuity announcer, it irritated him, so he eventually even told her directly that he didn't want to talk about this person at all. How he wanted to change the subject of the conversation, the girl immediately apologized and pretended as if she did not even suspect that this could offend him, and also said that he simply had great significance in their lives. But Catherine still did not calm down. She started the conversation about that very duel, and asked the man to be gentler with the guy, and also warned that this was not only her desire, but also Caitlin's. The man looked at her in surprise, and immediately asked how she was so confident in her words, but the girl immediately explained everything. She had thought out this whole plan in advance. He admitted without a doubt that the girl knew Caitlin better than he did. However, he still wasn't sure that she would want mercy for Mr. Moore, since he had, after all, done something unpleasant to her. Catherine said that she wasn't sure why they broke up. No matter what happened between them, she didn't think it would violate knightly valor. It was just a personal matter. Then suddenly, Teddy asked if this meant that the girl knew why he was challenged to a duel and what rule he had broken. Katrine replied that she didn't really know. She was just very concerned about the state of their personal life, so she contacted the announcer directly and, accordingly, was a little aware of all the details. As soon as you heard this, he became very angry. He couldn't believe that the girl, even though he knew all the details, continued to defend him. He even thought that she believed that Kate felt the same way, but of course she probably wouldn't feel that way. At the moment when she started talking about Answer, he considered it absolutely unnecessary. But he wasn't sure whether she was just a frivolous friend or trying to overshadow something between Kate and Terry. Well, now he was absolutely sure that everything concerned the latter. He told his position regarding the situation and even got furious when Catherine began to deny everything. He didn't like the fact that she was keeping a woman close by who was pressuring her and asking her to ask for the man who had hurt her, and that this was the stupidest and most terrible thing that Kate had ever done, keeping a girl like her among her close friends. He seriously considered this to be the worst thing ever. And after that, of course, they broke up because the man no longer saw the point in continuing this dialogue. When he returned to his estate, he was immediately met by an assistant. He said that a simply wonderful gift was waiting for him in the room, but the man was absolutely not in the mood to joke with him, so he simply threw his coat at him and left. He still didn't understand what Caitlin fell in love with when she met Answer, because he really was just a terrible person, and it was Vita from the very beginning. And besides, He didn't understand how she could have confused him with that ace that day. If she didn't remember anything at all, then everything would still be clear. However, she knew this situation perfectly, and for some reason, she thought that that bastard did it. But if he had known that everything would turn out like this, he would have definitely taken her in tears and delivered her straight to the Count. Then perhaps everything would have changed. As soon as the man entered his room, he immediately took off his shirt, and only then did he notice Caitlin, who was sitting with a piece of cake on the sofa and looking at him with a surprised look. He immediately came closer to her and, embarrassed, asked what she was doing in this place. After all, they had not agreed on any meetings. The girl explained that he hadn't come all the time, so she decided to visit him herself, thinking that it was possible to do so. He came closer to her and, brushing the hair from her face, smiling, said that she surprised him because she only thought that she wanted to see her, and she immediately appeared in his room. This was a real miracle in his opinion. Caitlin was still embarrassed that he was without a coat, so she asked him to change first. But Tempe didn't do this. He ran his hand over his abs and asked how she could be embarrassed. After all, they had already seen each other completely naked and signed various papers, so she definitely didn't need to experience such feelings. Caitlin learned that she couldn't just look at this body. It was too good to just ignore it. But she didn't want to show any unnecessary attention either. But since he was not going to get dressed, she decided to examine all the scars that were on his body and asked if they really didn't hurt. He explained that right now everything was fine, and it even seemed to hurt less when she touched him. When the girl saw all these wounds, she came to the conclusion that he had to go through a lot. And while she raised her hand higher and higher, she saw a rather interesting scar on his shoulder. She said that he must have been very sick, and Terry was amazed when he heard this, because he had already hoped that she had finally remembered the situation correctly and now understood who exactly saved her then. Unfortunately, this was not the case, and Caitlin, upon returning home, realized that he did not even suspect how much she was worried about his wounds and scars. She thought he was in a good mood, but suddenly he became angry and destroyed the warm atmosphere he had created. So they quarreled again and started a cold war. They hadn't seen each other for several days, and Caitlin was very irritated because of this, because she thought that they were adults and knew how to resolve conflicts. In fact, by that time, Madame Merrill had already returned to work, who always filled the void after her mother's death. So even now, when she saw that Caitlin was worried about something, she brought her hot tea. Of course, the girl was pleased to see her old friend, but at the same time, she was very uncomfortable even being around because of the situation that happened with her daughter. So she didn't even know how to behave. Caitlin was still glad to see this woman and immediately began asking her about the trips the woman had been on, and they began a nice conversation that was very casual. But then suddenly, Meryl took her hand and said that she heard that she and Catherine had a fight, so she told her how much it bothered her. She also said that her daughter did not tell her all the details, so she stopped pestering her with questions. After a few days, she simply asked her to apologize so that nothing would happen between them. Mary replied that she had to do it because their lady doesn't get angry for no reason, and she also explained to Caitlin that her daughter was probably angry because she took the lady's side and not hers. And that's why their relationship situation also worsened. Well, Caitlin explained her position on how she felt about all this, and the woman began to feel sorry for her as if she were her mother. Although, of course, it was obvious that her intentions were not at all pure. When they had hugged, only if her heart became even heavier, she smelled her mother's perfume and became sad. Madame Marine started wearing it for Caitlin precisely because she often cried and remembered her mother. And at that moment, she felt much better and felt relief in her soul. The heat that started because of the quarrel with Sterry and the anger seething inside that she felt when she started thinking about Ansara and Katrine suddenly left, and seeing Meryl's smile, she really calmed down. After everything calmed down, the woman asked Caitlin to tell her as soon as possible about everything new that had happened to her because she heard from the doctor that the girl was pregnant. Of course, she was very happy to hear about this. However, the doctor forbade her to tell anything. She herself would not have admitted it. A few more days passed from that moment, and finally, the Hort showed up and came for lunch. He had a special list of foods that he could eat, and which he couldn't, so the servants took a responsible approach to their lunch. The gentleman was also supposed to dine with them after the first courses were set out, Caitlin sat and silently looked at the man. She promised herself to say something first. However, this silence really irritated her, so she really hoped that he would finally talk about at least something. And soon, it really happened. Terry turned to Caitlin and asked if she had thought about marrying Answer. The girl did not expect that he would want to talk about exactly this, so it was like a stone fell on her head. She made it clear that she did not consider the option of marrying Arson because of pride, so she did not understand where he could find out the truth, she assumed, for example, from his father or brother. So the first thing she did, of course, was ask how he even knew about it. But Terry didn't answer this question. He just continued asking his questions, hoping that he would be able to hear the answers. They didn't have time to finish speaking when the Count entered the room. He apologized to the man for being late, but he just needed to deal with some more work, so he came as soon as he could. She was very happy that he finally showed up, and she didn't have to talk about this very uncomfortable topic for herself. But the man knew that they were talking about something there, so he said that if they needed to, they could continue during the meal. He wouldn't mind. Caitlin was upset about this, but Terry, on the contrary, was happy. He said that he heard that a real disaster happened a few years ago. The girl couldn't believe that he was going to raise this topic right in front of her father, but the Count intervened in the conversation and said that just the thought of it made his hands shake and a cold sweat break out. Those scoundrels forced her nanny to go outside, even though they were on the edge of the capital. And of course, it all ended with her letting go of her hand. Her mother fell ill, and he had to send soldiers. Communication with the palace was simply terrible. It was very difficult for him to go through everything. And Caitlin wasn't just lost. She was stolen by escaped prisoners. Luckily, he had a contract with His Highness and gave him the Imperial Knights. However, it took them and their men several days to finally find her. Terry, after hearing this story, said that he was glad that she was finally saved. The man agreed and also added that the Ansar who came with the division had a very difficult time. The man said in a cold voice that he understood everything, although in fact he knew the truth, and it was completely different from what everyone around believed. Caitlin always thought that the man would be rather reserved when it came to such things, but now that they were supposed to get married, this issue most likely began to bother him more. She felt guilty for being honest about the answer, because now it complicated the situation even more. But she couldn't turn back time, so there was nothing she could do. Then, suddenly, Caitlin began to analyze the situation and suggested that perhaps the man behaved in this way because he was jealous. She even reached her foot towards his ankle to show that she was not angry. The girl moved her heel upwards, and the man became incredibly embarrassed. He did not understand how she could do such a thing when they were at the same table with her father. He whispered and asked her to stop doing this. Caitlin, of course, laughed because she understood what reaction her behavior would cause and continued on purpose. The girl told her father that of course she couldn't deny the existence of her love for the Ansara, but now everything had changed and her heart had been captured by Terry. The man was kind and took good care of her, they sometimes argued, but it was even fun. Besides, he was very sweet, so he was the best man for her at the moment. As soon as the father saw and heard these words, he immediately felt very pleased. He was happy that his daughter had finally found a worthy groom for herself. After dinner was over, they went up to Caitlin's bedroom. They were sitting on the bed, and the man was approaching her particularly quickly, and after that, they left. She didn't understand what was going on at all. They finished dinner at the house and then went to the Horta estate for the dessert that Sonia had prepared. They ate some Herbinian goodies in the room, made a few silly jokes, and somehow ended up talking about Caitlin's mom, which was a pretty heartfelt and very bonding conversation. They also listened to the story of Terry's life before he became a knight, and when this endless conversation suddenly ended, the mood between them changed. It was all very strange for the girl, but at the same time it was pleasant. His hand reached out to hers, and after that, he plucked up his courage and kissed her right on the lips. Kathleen felt very good about it, so she didn't reject him. When the kiss ended, the man gently squeezed her hand and said that right now he would like to hug her. Of course, he asked permission because he thought it was necessary. Caitlin was very surprised. She was about to tell the man that he definitely could have done without asking permission for this, but then suddenly she felt a sharp pain in her stomach. She asked him for forgiveness and went to the bathroom, and the man all this time hoped that it was not because of him. And even if it was because of him, he did not harm her much. When the girl was almost in the bathroom, Terry suddenly saw something terrible. He told the girl to look at her feet and asked what was wrong with her. And lowering her head down, Caitlin saw a whole pool of blood underneath her. From this, she was horrified in the blink of an eye. Not only did her stomach begin to hurt, but she turned completely white. Now it was clear why she was bleeding heavily. The girl even lost consciousness and began to fall. Fortunately, Terry managed to run up in time and grabbed her so that she didn't hit her head. Dr. Fernando immediately came to them. Caitlin continued to bleed. The man put her to bed and hoped that everything would be fine. Meanwhile, news about Caitlin's condition had already reached the Count. After the examination, the doctor came to him and reported all the detailed information. Praxia contains a compound that is harmful to the placenta, which is why this plant is very dangerous for pregnant women. The doctor also explained that in the South, there was a plant that was sometimes eaten specifically to induce a miscarriage. However, there was no way to remove the child without putting strain on the mother's body, so this was very serious. The Count was simply horrified. He didn't know how he should react to all this. He himself felt a little ill, but the doctor explained that she had been bleeding, but fortunately, everything was fine with the child. He was healthy. It was difficult for them to say that the girl was now completely okay. They needed to monitor her condition for some time in order to be sure. After this incident, the master called a maid because, as it turned out, it was Amy who added that spice, which was absolutely forbidden for pregnant women, to lunch, because of which the mistress became ill. The maids burst into tears and told Fernando that she had never touched the practice and had strictly ordered that no one should add it under any circumstances. And in her opinion, no one could do that. The Count was furious. He did not understand how this thing could have gotten into her dish. Meanwhile, Meryl ran into his room and said that it was all her fault. She couldn't imagine that this would happen, so she asked for this spice to be added because it was very aromatic and could perfectly complement the dish. But now she was very sorry that everything turned out badly, but the Count still didn't believe it. He ordered Amy to be thrown out of the estate because he had to punish at least someone in this situation, since he couldn't touch Meryl because it could threaten his reputation. The girl begged him not to do this, but of course it was all in vain. Meryl, meanwhile, also began to beg him to change his mind, because she kept repeating her guilt and did not want Amy to be punished. The man didn't want to listen to anyone. He simply left the room, leaving the girls alone. The main thing is that the maid turned to the doctor and asked how the lady was doing. After all, she pretended to be worried about it. He explained that everything was fine with the fruit as well, but they would find out a little more when they monitored her for some time. It was also very good that the girl did not eat so much of this plant, otherwise everything could have ended even badly. At some point, Meryl ran to Amy. She started yelling at her and calling her names. She accused her of adding this spice and was to blame. Although this, of course, was not true. Eventually, the doctor finally calmed her down, and a rather unusual silence reigned in the estate. But no one dared to disturb the Count or anyone else in such a situation. Meanwhile, Caitlin was in the bedroom. He had changed her clothes. The girl looked just awful. This loss of blood had affected her seriously. In fact, she always felt bad. Even from the sight of blood, the most shocking scenes she remembered was the sight of a knight who was bleeding from a wound in the shoulder. It was he who saved her then. Caitlin cried for quite a long time then. However, the guy still managed to calm her down. He promised that he would definitely bring her home. The girl periodically glanced at his wound and frankly said that she hoped that he would not die. She didn't want this to happen despite the pain when Caitlin said that she would marry him. He smiled softly and gently stroked her head. Caitlin remembered just perfectly the voice in which he said that he would wait until she grew up, and the strong embrace that held her until she fell asleep. Now when the girl tried to remember this voice that endlessly calmed her when she tried to remember his face, for some reason, she could not do it. Even in her dreams, she had never seen a face like that. It always eluded her like a haze. Catherine was absolutely sure that she knew who this knight was, but now, over time, she began to have doubts about this. After some time, Caitlin opened her eyes and first heard a rather familiar voice that asked the girl how she felt and everything like that. For a minute, she even thought that she was back in childhood and this knight was calling her. But when she opened her eyes completely, she saw that it was Terry. He helped her up and asked if everything was okay with her. and how she felt now. Caitlin didn't even have time to answer him for some reason. Tears started running down her cheeks. The man immediately hugged her to console her and said that everything was fine. The girl, of course, was worried about the child. She asked what would happen if her child was no longer there. Her stomach hurt so much that at some point she even thought she would die. Well, Terry hugged her and said that everything was fine. She was now safe. Nothing bad had happened. The baby was there, and they were both okay. Then Caitlin started crying even harder. For some reason, Terry's voice was able to convince her that everything was fine. And it was strange, because usually the girl needed hours of persuasion and reassurance. The man thanked her for being safe and hugged her until she calmed down. He allowed her to release all these accumulated emotions and supported her like no one else. In fact, on the day when the captives from the recently conquered kingdom of Karakona escaped and caused chaos in the city, all the houses were closed. There wasn't a soul on the street. It was absolutely silent. People were afraid to even look out the window because these hooligans could do simply terrible things to you. Capturing and transporting prisoners was Terry's job. So when he heard that a noble lady had been kidnapped, things only got worse. Even the Imperial Knights were mobilized then, and the guy understood that this noble lady was probably a very important person since several battalions had already been gathered. It all happened by no accident to find in different schools a commander who once defeated Terry on the battlefield and to find Caitlin when they were following him. All this happened unplanned. The man was the first to run into this place with his assistants and began to fight. He had to fulfill this mission, and when one of the invaders ran at Caitlin and was about to kill her, the man managed to react in time. He removed the girl from there, hugging her and protecting her with his body. It was then that he was pierced with a sword. His shoulder was dripping with blood. Caitlin was very scared. She saw that the knight who had saved her had fallen to the ground and could not even move. Of course, the girl was very scared. She thought that he would die, but the guy replied that this would not happen. Meanwhile, other knights who were below rushed to his aid. They killed the kidnapper, so everything worked out. The knights also said that they could deal with the rest themselves. Terry should take the prisoner and leave immediately because more people could come to the aid of these hooligans. Of course, Terry would have preferred to leave his guys to the tornado. However, seeing how the girl was shaking in his arms with fear, at that moment he only wanted to save her, so he turned away from their victims, picked her up, and ran away without looking back or remorse. Barely able to stand on his feet, he found a place where they could hide and tried to calm her down. Caitlin was the first person who asked him not to die from the moment he first took the sword in his hands. And when he heard that Caitlin was ready to even marry him in the future as a sign of gratitude, he was completely surprised. In fact, he had heard the expression, "to die with honor," more than once, and it was precisely that time, when someone sincerely asked him not to die, that he realized that he had to keep that promise at any cost. Even with his mind fogged up, he remembered smiling over and over again. It seemed to him that he could only smile all day just by seeing the girl, while her breathing calmed down and slowed down. Terry kept his eyes open just to stay alive. It was funny, Dasha, looking back. He had no fear of death, an honor to die in battle. The emotions he experienced at that moment were not appropriate for a knight of the Empire. When other assistants came running to him, he ordered that the first thing to do was to take Caitlin. He didn't even care about his life, but it was almost cut short due to severe bleeding. Thus, several years passed, and the knights on his team began to insist that the man find himself a girl and start dating. He then told him about all the rumors that were being said about Terry, and also brought up the topic of Answer, the most famous person in the capital after Terry. He said that some people were saying that this man was dating the most honorable lady in the capital, the daughter of the Earl of Grint, and that everything was serious between them. In fact, the man never looked for her or asked about her. However, as soon as he heard her name, he immediately became dumbfounded. By my time, he was sure that he had already forgotten her. Going to war after war, gnawing in blood, flirting with death, being beaten by endless training, he did not have the opportunity to even think about Caitlin. However, now when he heard about her, he suddenly remembered the childhood promise that she gave him, and immediately laughed. Despite this, he was happy that everything was fine with her. So another year passed. He was leaving the bar, supporting his assistant, and then he saw Caitlin in all her glory. At first, of course, he didn't recognize her. However, the moment he saw her full appearance, his heart instantly sped up. When he saw Caitlin, he realized that she had not changed at all over all these years. Aura, a slight smile and a beautiful manner of speech, said that nothing had changed for her. She did not change herself for the sake of society, and this made him happy. After he saw her on that fateful day when he left the bar with her brother, he suffered from a fever every night. Her face, voice, gestures, every movement. The memory of her made his heart simply burn. Terry understood that it was wrong because there was nothing between them. He was shocked by himself. He didn't know that he was capable of such feelings, even for a stranger. After several days of this burning madness, he came to the conclusion that there was no logical reason for this late fever. Not because she was charming, not because he was starved for love, and not because he saved her life, not for some trivial reason. Like all of those things, it couldn't happen. He was actually destined to love her from the start, regardless of when they met. He thought that he would inevitably still fall in love with Caitlin, no matter what happened. So now, when he saw Caitlin in such a terrible state, he was the most scared. And when she finally woke up, he was the happiest person in the world. He immediately gave the girl a special medicine. Caitlin had to drink it, even though she didn't like the taste. It was simply disgusting, but Terry insisted, because Fernando hadn't slept all night to prepare it for her. The doctor also examined her and saw that her condition was not getting worse. He was very worried because it was a horrible plant. However, the kid dealt with it well, and this calmed him down a lot. He wasn't even born yet, but he was already able to resist evil. This was astonishing and at the same time admirable, because he would definitely be very strong. Caitlin and Terry were very happy to hear this. The girl, in her joy, even kissed the man right in front of the doctor, who, seeing this, was even embarrassed. After a short kiss, Terry asked what she had just done, and Caitlin said that they were supposed to get married soon, so she didn't understand why he was so embarrassed about this. The doctor, who was completely uncomfortable being around this couple in love, left and told the girl not to forget to drink the decoction before and after meals and to try not to be nervous. Before he left, the girl asked him to call Amy to her, because she was probably very shocked by everything that happened and would like to meet her. Well, hearing this, Fernando became very sad. He had to tell the girl about what happened, and of course he did it. Having heard this terrible news, Caitlin quickly changed her clothes, came to the palace to see her father, and burst into his office. She had to find out what had happened, and most importantly, why he had kicked out her maid. The girl immediately came to him with a clear request that he return Amy, but her father, of course, did not react to this very positively. Caitlin defended Amy's rights because she had absolute confidence in her maid, and could not, under any circumstances, believe that this beautiful and sweet girl could even think of harming her. Well, the Count still didn't understand how it could have happened that this spice was put into her dish when Fernando personally came and claimed that this couldn't be done. She continued to ask how he could believe that this beautiful girl could harm her, and argued that such cases had never happened before, so it was probably just some kind of misunderstanding. But the man didn't want to listen to all this. He said that she provoked this chaos, so he couldn't even see her anymore, and also asked his daughter to leave. Well, Caitlin was very angry at that moment. Tears appeared in her eyes, and she said that he himself knew very well how important Amy was to her, and she could not believe that he was ready to cause her so much pain by kicking her out. But the man didn't even look her in the eyes. He only said that as soon as she had her own children, she would understand his feelings and perhaps realize why he did what he did. After this, the girl left the room and burst into tears. She claimed to Terry that Amy would never have done such a thing, that it was all some kind of big mistake. Well, the man, having asked Caitlin for forgiveness, agreed with the Count, considering all the circumstances that had occurred. The maid was too suspicious, so measures had to be taken. He gave her all the arguments, but Caitlin still wasn't going to believe it. She was going to prove on her own that Amy was innocent. Now the girl wanted to reveal the truth at any cost so that no one would dare to slander the innocent girl again. So the first thing she did was go to the maid Jane, who was with Amy that day, and ask her to tell her all the details. The maid let her in and made tea for her and told her exactly how it all happened. Jane said that she sincerely did not understand why Amy was kicked out of the estate, because she was with her all the time while cooking, and the maid never added this spice. Caitlin was delighted to hear this. Even though she never doubted Amy for a second, hearing this confirmation was a big victory for her. So she immediately asked if Jane had seen who could have added to the success. But the maid was very worried. She said that no one had done anything except Amy, no one had even touched this spice, and everyone had acted carefully. But in that case, Caitlin didn't understand how this spice could have ended up in the dish. It was all very strange and incomprehensible. Jane didn't want to slander anyone. However, she still said that the only person who knew that they were going to make soup that day was Madame Marielle. The woman had to meet with a supplier early that morning, so she prepared only the basic ingredients in a pot before leaving. To make potagnese soup, they would usually put potatoes and corn on the bottom, then add the rest and cover everything with large cabbage leaves. Madame Marielle did all this before her meeting, and only after that, as usual, she began to prepare the broth. Jane finally said that if this spice really did somehow end up in this dish, then no one else except Madame Marielle could have added it. Amy didn't even touch the spice jar while cooking. As soon as Caitlin heard this, she was incredibly shocked. For her, it was like a stab in the back. And Terry couldn't believe that it was true. He immediately tried to calm his bride down. But of course it was in vain. She didn't expect this. Jane also gave various details about how this spice could have been completely invisible in this soup, and continued to prove Amy's innocence, and, on the contrary, Madame Marielle's guilt in this situation. Caitlin simply could not believe all this. However, if the maid was telling the truth, then the one who could add the practice was indeed Madame Marielle. And this means that the woman already had some kind of biased attitude towards her from the very beginning. And after she prepared the soup with this spice, she handed everything over to Amy, the only person who knew about Caitlin's pregnancy. So now everything was absolutely clear. This action was intentional. She was going to harm Caitlin and the child, and after that, blame Amy. However, the question still remained open. What benefit did I have for her from this? Why did she want to do this? She didn't understand at all how she deserved all this and how this woman was able to give the trust that they had. However, as soon as she heard all this information and began to analyze it in her head, this memory surfaced in her mind of how she saw Catherine kissing Answer. The girl did not understand why this happened. However, she assumed that the anger shown towards her by her mother and daughter was never accidental, and that there was probably some reason behind it that was unknown to her. Of course, after this incident, the first thing the girl did was go to Catherine. She had to talk to her about everything and hear her version. Caitlin was going to ask directly why she had lied to her all this time, when, together with Answer, they had been fooling her behind her back. Why had she lied straight to her face? Of course, Catherine was not ready for such a question. She continued to pretend as if she did not understand anything and did not want to talk about it. Eventually, when Caitlin made it clear to the girl that lying was useless, Catherine asked her to listen to her and told her that she allegedly felt guilty all this time. When Ansar said that he liked her, she should have stopped him at that very moment. But the girl, of course, did not do this, so Caitlin would like to know just why. Katrine started to play the victim. She didn't understand why the girl didn't believe her, and how she could say such terrible things, because she considered her a friend and protected her as best she could. However, Kathleen said that if she really considered her a loyal friend, she would definitely have told her everything. After all, that's what friends do. She should have said that Ansar liked her, that she liked him too, and that she wanted to have an open relationship with him, but instead she just lied to her face the whole time. Caitlin was outraged by the fact that she had spent many years running after this man, losing herself for nothing, and now she felt sorry for the wasted time. So she just wanted the woman not to mention his name, even in this conversation. Catherine began to defend the name of the Answer, and the girl could no longer stand it. She simply walked up and hit her on the cheek. Of course, Caitlin's friend was shocked. She asked what she was doing, but the girl just continued to hit her. She started saying various things. And then suddenly, Catherine finally showed her true nature. She asked, "Does the girl really consider herself above everyone else?" Catherine looked at her with an icy gaze and said that she never envied her. She only evoked pity and even disgust in some moments. I couldn't believe that she was saying something like that. She didn't even suspect that she could evoke such feelings in the girl. Then Catherine finally told her the whole truth about what she did, because she wanted to see the girl's downfall. Every time she looked at her, she felt only pity. so she wanted the girl to experience the same at least once. However, it's all over. Catherine also said that she could never have imagined that sweet little Kate, who only saw Answer, would go so far as to hide with another man. Now everything was different. Caitlin still didn't fully understand everything, so she yelled at the girl and told her to immediately say what she meant. This misunderstanding bothered her, but Catherine did not understand why she needed to hear this from her. Because everything was exactly as she thought it was, she moved closer to her and whispered in her ear that they were much closer than she had imagined. At that moment, Caitlin remembered that conversation about her friend's father, and everything finally became clear to her. She couldn't believe that this was true. She was afraid to realize this information. Of course, there is a reason behind everything. However, she would never have thought that they could be half-sisters, and it was precisely for this reason that Catherine would wish her harm in every way possible. After this emotional conversation, Caitlin returned to the estate to Hurt and immediately asked where Terry was, because she had to see him urgently. But the guy was at training, so he still wasn't supposed to return soon. Caitlin then asked the assistant to tell him when he returned that she was in her room. As soon as she went there, she just sat and looked away. She could not bring herself to go home and see her father after the news she learned. She wanted to believe that he was not such a person. However, if not for Catherine and Madame Merrill, there would be no reason to poison her life, so everything was obvious. Father too soft-hearted to leave a woman and her daughter after fathering an illegitimate child, unlike most heartless men. So Caitlin understood perfectly well why the wife and child who could not call themselves that had now decided to take revenge on her. But still, Kriplin didn't understand what exactly she had done wrong. Was this really enough to put her life at risk and kill her child? She kept thinking about where the girl had gone wrong, and she burst into tears. It was very bitter for her to realize that all her efforts were now in vain. She truly cared about both of them, trusted them as much as she trusted herself. Even her father, who she thought was honest with her, turned out to be a liar and had a huge secret that he should have told her about a long time ago. Then Caitlin thought about what could even be called trust in each other, since her own father could not tell her about such news, and she was not sure whether she could trust anyone now. After some time, Turley finally arrived back at the palace and immediately began to tell her what he had been doing all this time. However, then he suddenly noticed and saw that Caitlin was crying. Of course, he immediately became worried, ran closer to her and hugged her, asking what happened. Of course, he thought that something mega serious had happened to their child or her health. Yesterday, she said that she needed to confirm something, so he waited for her to return. However, now, seeing her emotions, he understood that most likely everything did not go as smoothly as she thought. Having burst into tears, she couldn't tell him anything more. She simply hugged him and continued to cry into his shoulder. The man, of course, didn't object to this. He stroked her head and calmed her down. He said that he would wait until she was ready to tell him everything. After some time, Caitlin finally spoke through her tears. She remembered that he once told her that it was not so easy for her to trust people. However, living in a world where you do not trust anyone is very sad. So she asked him what he thought. Could he be the only person she could count on? Someone she would never have to doubt under any circumstances. Terry, hearing this, was very surprised. He looked at the girl and said that of course he could not give her confidence, only with these words. He was going to prove it to her so that she would not have to confirm the truth with words. He was going to stay with her forever, and he believed that this action would be the one that would show his true intentions. Whatever happened, he would always be next to Keitel. As soon as the girl heard this, tears welled up in her eyes again. She did not understand why he was so nice to her all the time and how he found the right words. They got married just because of one night spent together. However, the way he looked at her with cocktails told her that he was deeply in love with the girl, and somehow that look dissolved all the doubts in her heart with a quiet warmth. So Caitlin was now confident in this man and could no longer doubt. After what happened, she spent several days sorting out her feelings and finally decided what she needed to do. She went to her father after thinking everything through. She asked her father if she could manage their estate for a while. Of course, this news greatly surprised the Count. He didn't understand why even she had to do this. After all, she had to leave this estate soon, so it was a very strange request. Caitlin explained that she should have done this a long time ago, But this situation made her realize that everything was out of control, and this was most likely due to the fact that they entrusted absolutely all matters to Madame Muriel. And that is why she wanted to do everything on her own now and also reorganize the staff. Of course, her father did not object. On the contrary, he praised the girl for such desires and aspirations because it was good for her to practice in this matter. But he simply asked that she continue to monitor her health and in no case overexert herself. Kathleen promised him that she would definitely keep everything under control. After this, she went back. The man did not understand why she did not tell the Count anything about what she already knew. She did say that Madame Morel was behind all of this, and he believed that she could have told him and gotten her maid back. So her decision was a little questionable for him. But of course, Caitlin explained that all of this was circumstantial evidence and suspicions, so even if she wanted to, she couldn't prove it in any way. And besides, even if she put this seasoning there, she was not completely sure that Madame Morel did it on purpose. Of course she didn't think so, because after several painful days, she decided to hide this incident, and it was very difficult for her. Caitlin understood that Madame Merrill, unlike Catherine, felt a deep hatred towards her real daughter. She had been harboring a desire for revenge for decades, and if it suddenly turned out that she had put this spice, then of course the woman would understand that she had nothing more to lose, and perhaps she could accept the consequences silently. But most likely, this is not the case. Caitlin understood that she would definitely try to expose her father's sins, and then rumors would spread and people would begin to condemn the dark past of their family. Not only Father A, but all of them. They will call Caitlin a deceiver because of her closeness with Catherine, an illegitimate child. They will say that Alex point-blank saw nothing, and will shame him as a knight, and even trample the name of their late mother in the dirt. And Caitlin understood perfectly well that if this happened, their family would no longer return to the previous course of things when they laughed and talked. But even if she pretended that she didn't know anything, they could live as if nothing had happened. That is why Caitlin made a very difficult but, in her opinion, correct decision to keep Madame Merrill close by, even despite what she had done. The girl explained to Terry that she simply did not want to make a scene out of all this and, on the contrary, make herself worry even more. She did not think that he needed to tell all her suspicions about this matter. The man, of course, would like to resolve this situation and help Caitlin. However, he believed that she should have dealt with it on her own, so he said that any decision she made was correct if she thought so. She decided to go to Madame Muriel on her own, and Teddy had to stay outside. Caitlin really blamed herself for having to hide something from him, but it was really necessary. She simply had no other choice but to remain silent and hide this best solution for everyone. But first of all, before heading to Madame Merrill, Caitlin decided to drop in on her former maid, Amy, who had an incredibly large family with many brothers and sisters. Amy apologized to her for not being able to offer her anything as a dessert with her tea, but she added a little honey, so she was sure to like it. Of course, it was very painful for Caitlin to look at the situation the girl found herself in. She would madly like to clear her name, but she was not yet sure whether she could do it. Amy immediately began to apologize to her for being careless, because of her lady could have seriously suffered, so she asked with tears in her eyes how the girl felt and whether everything was okay with the child. Lynn replied that everything was fine, so she shouldn't worry, and also asked that she not change anymore, because she hadn't done anything wrong. Yemi was very touched by the fact that the lady truly believed in her innocence, and at the same time was grateful to her for this, because at some point it seemed to her that everyone had turned away from her, even her close friends.